This is the Take Your Turn 2022 tournament, the Go event, finals recap. This was a best of three between Faded Sun and Zoronix. Now, in round four of the group stage, Zero and Faded played a set, with Faded winning 2-0. So now that we're in the finals, the big question obviously is, can Zero outmaneuver or outplay Faded and take the win? To find out, we're going to look first at game one with Zoronix or Zero as black and Faded Sun or Faded as white. The game starts normally, and we get a quick invasion after Zero encloses in the bottom right here. Faded then says, okay, I'm going to go for that 3-3 invasion and start things off, try to take some early points. And we get this quick exchange here where we have Faded taking early points. We have Zero taking early influence. All that feels pretty even, nothing too crazy. One thing that is interesting is Faded then takes the left side, tries to build that influence. We have Zero go for the invasion, and we have a much quicker digression. So instead of continuing along that third line, Zero opts to just play at F18 and play away quicker. So Faded says that's fine. Faded's going to go ahead and shore up their left corner to avoid another easy 3-3 invasion. And then the question is, where do we go from here? At this point, both players feel fairly stable. So it's black or Zero has the initiative, and so black is going to try to go ahead and see what can get done in this bottom center here. And what we get is important. So initially what we get here is we get Zero is able to get some additional influence in this bottom center, and also kind of reinforce a little bit on this influence on the right side and a little bit towards the center. Conversely, Faded is getting, with this G5 stone, is getting some additional pressure being able to be put towards the center, helping to expand their influence on the left-hand side. But because Zero plays at J3 to, again, get more influence on the lower center, and also, I believe, reinforce this G4 stone here, because this is a defensive play, it then cedes initiative to Faded, who quickly takes it and begins to put on a lot of pressure. So now, whereas it felt open just a couple moves ago, and even potentially with Zero having a little bit more possibilities in the center, because of that switch in initiative, Faded is able to lock it down, and this single move of G5 suddenly comes a jumping stone for a J and a K5 that begin to create this wall that sort of mark off potential territory and create an enormous amount of influence toward the center relative to what was there before, and forces Zero to put themselves just on the corner and make it much harder to use that leverage to push up. It doesn't have the same kind of room as it did before. So, and then at the same time, we have Faded, similar to J3. Faded plays back at C8 and plays a defensive move to avoid any shenanigans in this area, or try to avoid any shenanigans in this area. And so because of that, Zero is able to get the initiative. That Gote play allows Zero's now in Sente. Zero now has initiative, and Zero's going to use it to try to reinforce and bolster what was already a big influence play here, and to keep white pressed down on this upper edge of the board and make it more difficult for white to really get anything there, get anything significant. Now, one big thing is when we look at Q7, right around move 38 here, this to me is sort of the signal or the beginning of a big battle where you have Faded initially jumping in with Q9, trying to say, hey, I don't really want you to be able to take all of this. I want to make something happen here. And you have Zero who says, I'm going to make that difficult. I'm going to reinforce my position. I'm going to take away some of your base. And then when you have Faded come back and play on top with, or attach with a Q7 play, now it looks like, as opposed to strictly jumping out, it looks like Faded saying, I'm going to make myself live here. I'm going to make something happen. Even if you try to come at me from the center inward and try to squeeze me, I'm going to use this. I think there's enough space here that I can go ahead and live and be extremely disruptive. I think that's the goal in this. And so we get this unfolding. And if we go, so here, we've had this big exchange, and obviously went through it very quickly there, but you can see how we started with just a couple stones initially, and then in the tug of war for Faded to live and Zero to kill, we get these multiple cutting points here where you get all these weak groups that on their own aren't guaranteed alive, and so they're all vying for life. And it isn't until we get here with this move at P9 that we finally stabilize, that white is finally alive. But before that, we see this back and forth where, these groups, these stones are under threat, and then these stones are under threat. This stone here is under threat, and then a second later, these stones are under threat. And obviously with this, the simple attach here with P9 connects all these stones together and solidifies the death of these two stones, which means that the overall group is now stabilized. One of the other things that's important is now that this group here, as soon as this group becomes more stable, it allows Faded the time and the mental power to try to figure out how they can leverage it and use it. So you have these stones that were sort of born out of this back and forth in the center right. They're now being leveraged and being utilized to set up a strong presence in the center as well. So not only is Faded currently trying to take or is taking away and living on this right side now where black wanted to have steady, not only strong territory, but ideally have a large number of points on this right side. White's taken that away, and now white is also looking to get into the center and prevent black from being able to utilize any of its leverage. If we go back, so if we're on move 75, if we jump back, say right around here to move 33, this is a very different looking game. When we look at who has the most influence towards the center, well, clearly black's got a wall here, black's got stones here, and an extra stone here. This white does have some presence over here, and a little bit, can jump in a little bit here, but doesn't look to have nearly the same kind of strength. We go 40 moves later, and I think one of the things that Faded has done very well is removed, or at least dampened, heavily dampened, a lot of that initiative that Zero was trying to get in order to build in the center. So as this continues, we have Zero being very aggressive, turning around, doing the same sort of thing that Faded was doing, saying, hey, I don't think I want to give you all of this. I am going to push it. I'm going to push it, and I'm going to try and see what I can make happen. I'm going to see if I can live in this space, be as disruptive as you were, and in that way gain some points back. So we have E18, and I believe that Zero was looking at this and saw E17 as just a way to prevent white from easily connecting these three stones, and allow, and that the group would still be strong. The problem is, as soon as black plays at E17, white plays at C18, and now these three stones are dead because there's only a single liberty, and even if black tries to run, white will capture, which also destroys the top left corner for black. The issue, I'm sure, that too, is if black just plays back, white then connects, and now black's situation with these stones here is pretty tenuous, and looks pretty dicey. So it makes sense that he was looking for. I'm trying to remember my shortcuts, but I'll just have to click on it. With these triangular stones, black is worried that this is going to, that there isn't a way to live here, and wants to prevent white from getting an easy connection, but in doing so falls into the bigger trap that white has set, and that ends up ending the game. So with that move and that capture, Zero resigns, and so Faded Sun takes game one. Now, our next game is game two. Faded Sun plays black, Zoronix plays white. So they've they've swapped colors, and the question, of course, is with game one still coming out that Faded just was a little bit ahead in pacing, and reading seemed a little bit stronger. Can Zero do anything different with this game, or are we going to see another similar situation where Faded just seems to read a little bit further? So we have a early 3-3 invasion, and then we have Zero taking the corner. One of the things that is interesting here about this, so this is in some ways this is pretty standard, right? We have one player taking the corner for early easy points, and we have another player taking the outside for influence to hopefully turn those into points later on and leverage them for something bigger, but not taking anything immediately. What's nice though is that Zero gets in this early L16 that immediately gunks up the works or throws a wrench in the plan, in that it makes it a lot harder for Faded to leverage this wall, because there's already a blocker there that's if it's left alive is going to cause complications, make it more difficult to really effectively utilize how big this wall is. So I think that was a really nice to see. And then we have, again, same sort of thing. We have Faded very clearly opting for influence, very clearly opting for these seeding early points, and Zero seems happy to take them. In the corner, Faded looking towards the center and other bigger groups, and then we do have Zero jumping on this top center, trying to make it happen fairly early. So if we move through this, we have a little bit here. So what I want to do is get to this stage so we can just take a look, because this is a game with a few moves to it. So at this stage, if we look at the game state, we're 64 moves in, and we have, or I should say, Zero has the top right corner, the bottom right corner, the bottom left corner, and now the top left corner. Zero currently has points in all four corners. Faded has presumably some space here, presumably some space here, here, maybe something here, though it looks a little dicier. There's and not much. Obviously, Zero would like to get much of this and would certainly like to build the center. Even there, though, what's interesting is that Faded has jumped in with K13, already trying to at least make it difficult for Faded to make big plays in the center, because Zero is already present, already has stones there. This feels like a very different game than game one. It feels like there's a very different pacing, and it seems like at this stage in the game, Zero is got a good idea. And then the big question is, can Faded either capture enough and disrupt enough of these groups to get to convert the potential that they were trying to build into points. So if we progress a little bit further, and so we have a number of stabilizing moves here, small moves, some reductions. And then I wanted to note that I think the B5 move is really nice by Zero. We have these two stones that are kind of floating at the moment. They've got, they're bounded on one side by all these black stones, and they're bounded by the black stones as well on the lower side. So this B5 stone helps create a connection to this group in the bottom left that's ostensibly alive, giving them a lot more strength. And at the same time, what I do love about the way Faded handles this is that B5 stone gives a lot more stability and strength. And this, as we can see very clearly, doesn't prevent isolation. It makes it much harder, much less likely. But Faded is able to push through here and keep these stones, white stones on the left center side, isolated. So you still have the bound up here. You have a much stronger bound in the lower section of this board here, and it means that white can try and find life here in this space. Try and make two eyes. Seems very difficult. The most likely scenarios that white tries to push out and you start to get a running battle. What's nice about the way Faded has set this up is that if you look at it here with the way the board currently is, you have the leading white stone is at E8, whereas the leading black stones are at G10 and at G4. So Faded is already ahead of the game and of where white is most likely to want to try to run. Now there's a lot of space, so that's the other thing. There's a lot of space here, which means that just because Faded is out in front won't guarantee anything, but it's certainly a very nice setup. And we see the cap here trying to enclose. And then if we progress a little bit further, so I should say that we did do, this is a particularly complex and long game, so there's a lot here that I'm breezing past. There is a two-part review that was on my channel where we talk with both Ruler, Just Your Eventual Ruler, and Zero about this game specifically, and it's also an opportunity to sort of peek inside Zero's brain, get a look at the strategies they were utilizing, what their thoughts were at the time. So if this game is as interesting to you as it is to me, I definitely recommend checking that out because we do go into a lot more detail there. But for a general overview, at move 118 here, what I also want to point out is we see white sort of snaking their way along, trying to begin to build space and find this eye space, and you see this is extending further and further and further out. At the same time, we have this J8 play, which to me makes me wonder if Zero is going to try and connect here, if they're interested in trying to turn this around potentially, if they have an eye to like F10 perhaps, trying to get a cut in, see if they can split things off, see if they can do a counterattack in the midst of this running. But we'll see. So as it progresses, we begin to see the center get filled out. We have the right side that gets settled a little bit more. And it's here with Q11, move 146, that we do see not quite what I was expecting, but we see a little bit of Zero's counterattack, a lot of it of Zero's counterattack. So now we still have all these running stones that are not alive yet, but are close enough that they are going to be challenging to kill. At the same time, in amidst all this building in the center, while Zero was running, there was also enough construction here in the top center, in the upper center, that Zero was able to fit in a trap. And we have these two cutting points here that now you have these black stones that are isolated. And if Zero can take these stones, not only would white then live in the center, because white already has all four corners, if they can keep them, or at least a majority of them, that would set Zero up for a great lead in this game and a dominant position. But if they lose that, that's where Faded could come back. However, looking at this, it looks like it's in a pretty good position. Is the center here? It looks like it's in a pretty good position for white. That said, there's still a lot of space to work with, and that's where this complexity and these traps can be set up to sort of change things around. I want to note, this is where we're going to really skip here, but move 157, P13. I just want, this is such an important move, although it doesn't look like it at the time. So if we watch for P13, it's going to come back later. So from P13, we're gonna progress a little bit. We're going to see the ways in which these corners begin to shape up. There's going to be a few captures here. And I was so excited I went a little bit ahead. But at 011 on move 191, almost 40 moves or maybe a little bit more later, we are 34 moves. Had to write it down. So about 34 moves ago, we were talking about P13. And now we can see how much more of the board is settled, and we can see how P13 comes into play. So a couple things about the general board state. We still have the corners for white are still settled. White looks like they have a great space here, which gives great leverage to everything else in the center. It means that if you don't need to make two eyes in this space or this space, you can suddenly be a lot more aggressive. You don't have to play as defensively, and that can end up being really great when you're trying to be on the offensive here, for example. You can also see that we've got, so this one here, and this one here, those are potentially false eyes. At least the C11 and the B14 are. Well, not quite actually, because we're still waiting on this one. So sorry, at least the C11 is. I'm looking at white, if white can play at C13 and D13 to make that a false eye, to maybe make some shenanigans happen. But I'm still most interested in this center section here. Now, what black does is, with this 011 play, black is springing a trap. So I've already accidentally shown but this makes sense, the P12 immediate follow-up. If you want to take a second here, pause the video if you're interested in trying to read out why this is significant. That's absolutely wonderful. I'll wait a second, and then I'll go ahead and explain and demonstrate why this trap is so devastating. So, because of P13 that looks fairly innocuous, I mean, there are many parts to this, but what stuck out to me rereading the game is in P13, because of P13, when white goes to fill at P12, then Faded can immediately put this into Atari, put it down to one liberty, only one space. You have to play to keep the group alive, have to keep moving forward. And what is great is if we look at how it plays out first, and we'll look at a variation. First off, now these stones are dead. Clearly, if Zero just ignores it, black will capture. But if if Zero tries to protect, puts the groups together, Faded is already ready to immediately surround, and then there's no way for white to get out, and the whole group is dead. So this becomes a trap that removes, now the whole center for black is A-okay. It's a huge reversal and a wonderful play by Faded. But what I wanted to note is that if we look at a variation, one thing that Faded did very smartly is, if Faded hadn't been reading carefully and had simply tried to keep these stones in Atari by pushing up, that suddenly, this cut at L15 no longer works the same way because there's two liberties instead of one. And so Faded was careful about that, played correctly to keep those stones always under immediate threat. So from there, once that's down, that creates an entirely different environment. Now, not only are these stones alive, now these stones are alive, and the center is looking much more complex. So we're going to roll through that because there's a lot here to go through. And I think at the moment for a recap, it's just useful to see sort of how this pans out. I breezed over this, but both C13 and D13 were taken by white, which means that your C14 and or B14 and your C11, these triangle points, are false size, which means your B12 is potentially as well. So that means that you have this enormous chain, if we snake it, enormous black chain of black stones here that could be captured. It's the sort of thing I look for. That is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? It's difficult to be very generous about it, but it's possible, and it would be explosive if it happened. So the problem with that is although Zero is trying to keep this down to a single eye, the capture relies on this inner group of white stones here. Let me show the full group. So it relies on these inner stones also staying alive, and they also have only one eye. And unfortunately, they have fewer liberties. So if that group goes down, then the whole thing falls apart. And the big issue is just that in this case, they are short a few liberties. I won't go into the variations right now, but there are a couple of variations where even if, before we get to this point where these stones are captured, even if white tries to stay alive, they're still short by a liberty. And it's so close, but it's just not quite close enough. So after this, these stones are taken. Zero resigns. Faded wins. Faded wins the set. 2-0, the best of 3. 2-0, which means that Faded wins the finals. Faded wins the Take Your Tournament Go event, taking first place. Zero taking second. I think that both of these games were really fantastic because they're so different. Game 1 was less than 100 moves, and I think it really showcased sort of the fundamentals of spacing, sequencing, of being able to read. It ends with this unfortunate for the side that gets captured, the unfortunate trap. But even before that, the way the board is lining up, I think there's a very clear advantage at the moment. Whereas when we look at game 2, that's over 250 moves. It's really diving into these intricate, multi-layered fighting where you have all these groups inside and outside, battling for life against each other. Multiple groups sort of working simultaneously. The center is so complex. And there's so much happening here. There's so much back and forth. Before that trap was sprung by Faded, I think that Zero showed a really different kind of game, and it was extremely impressive. To me, it looked like Zero was in a very good position against Faded. Unlike this game, or unlike the round 4 games, Zero looked to be in a much more commanding position until that mistake. And that happens. But I think that what it showcases is that Zero can absolutely bring it to Faded. The 2-0 shows us the end state of the game and not necessarily the back and forth in the full spectrum. I'd be really interested to see more games between them and to see if Zero's style against Faded can continue to evolve, because this was very impressive. I think this was a great step up. But with that, I just wanted to say, thank you, congratulations to Faded Sun for taking first place. Congratulations to Zero for taking second. So a lot of games that they and everyone had to play to get there. I did want to say, I guess, also a general thank you to all the players for participating. I know it was a long season of games, but we got to see a lot of really cool ones, and it was great to see a lot of people step into the game for the first time or come back to it and really get into it. Thank you for everyone who's watched. Thank you for the Group of War group for giving us this opportunity. And if you're interested in more in-depth looks at the games across the Take Your Turn tournament, you can definitely check out my YouTube channel for all things Go. For the Wargroove and chess portions, obviously keep it right here on the Group of War channel. Thank you, everyone. Take care.